Eduardo Mora once said, and I quote, "There is nothing but sustainable architecture because the first precondition of architecture is sustainability." A very warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Architect G. Shankar, the esteemed panelists, Dr. Anita Sushilan, Head of Department, Christ School of Architecture, faculty members, fellow Christites, and the audience who has joined us from far and wide. I am Ishita Iyer, and it is my privilege to be the moderator for this session. Daksh is an annual education and career guidance fair organized by the Student Council of Christ deemed to be university. It focuses on various career opportunities made available to pre-university, undergraduate, and postgraduate students. Career dialogues are a distinctive feature of Daksh, wherein eminent figures from diversified fields are invited to share their expertise about the prospects for students wishing to pursue the career in these fields. And it gives me immense pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for the session, Dr. Architect G. Shankar, who will be sharing with us his insights on the future of architecture and low-cost housing technologies. Dr. G. Shankar received the Padma Shri Award in recognition of distinguished service in the field of science and engineering by Government of India in 2011. He is an environmentalist and has been recognized for his efforts and contribution to the field of architecture. To name a few, he has received the first Laurie Baker Award constituted by the Government of Kerala for outstanding contribution to low-cost housing technologies. National Award for Slum Rehabilitation Works instituted by the Ministry of Poverty Alleviation by Government of India in 2004. Person of the Year Award by India Vision News Channel for the year 2005. The first Laurie Baker Award from Designer Magazine for the Best Architect in Kerala. Dr. G. Shankar had completed his bachelor's in architecture from Kerala University, after which he went on to pursue MS from the Birmingham School of Architecture in the UK with a first rank and distinction. Sir has been the founder and chairman of Habitat Technology Group since 1987. We warmly welcome you, sir. But before we begin, I would like to invite Dr. Anita Sushilan to briefly welcome everyone on behalf of School of Architecture.
Thank you, sir. It's a wonderful day. A warm welcome to everyone on board and all the students who are attending this session. On behalf of School of Architecture, I extend a warm welcome to my fellow panelists in their absentia, Dr. Johnny Joseph, Director of Student Council, and all the faculty coordinators of Daksh, because it's a wonderful event being organized and anchored by Christ University. And I extend a warm welcome to Professor Jyoti Gupta, also on the panel, who's a faculty member of School of Architecture and also representing the technical and logistic assistance team. And on behalf of School of Architecture, I extend a warm welcome to Architect Shankar. In fact, we are very privileged to have you, sir, this morning, this session on board, and especially at School of Architecture Christ, because this is a very young school. I think we have briefed a little while ago, under Christ University, conceived in the year 2017. But we have very interesting pedagogical changes that we have anchored at School of Architecture. And also one of the very special studio program, which I would like to brief at this note, because it forms a very wonderful conjunction to this particular talk that we are expecting from you at this session. I wish to introduce to you the Rural Studio program that School of Architecture Christ has been anchoring it since 2018. And we have developed a wonderful portfolio in this regard. This Rural Studio is exceptionally different from other school architectural studio events. This is an outreach project where the student not only learns how to design and work with alternative techniques of construction and having a sustainable attitude towards construction and architecture, but beyond that, it's an outreach studio where they get a chance to build and work on a real-time project. So we just completed a bridge construction and also an anti-venom treatment center. And our prime material that we were concerning with was bamboo construction, and which is a composite construction which we have looked at. And this particular portfolio has been sent for various international events, especially the Lafarge Wholesome Award for sustainable construction, and also it has been sent as an entry for selection under London Biennale 2021. It's a very important program where we sensitize students to come very close to environment, and also making an appropriate choice of material, and making, these are larger concerns and concepts which are talked under sustainable architecture, but here they go live and go real with the project, working with the material. And as far as the school is concerned, beyond just teaching learning, we have adopted 3 materials. One is paper, second is bamboo, and the third one we are working with is mud. So this has been a kind of an initiative. I acknowledge this as an ambitious green vision that we are looking for this particular educational platform. And Ishita is one among the students who are actually undergoing this rural studio this 4th semester. It's normally happens in the 2nd year. So with this brief introduction to the school and the special program, let me just give the platform to Sir, and we're really looking forward to this session, and it would be a great learning forum, especially the students are initiated to mud architecture this time, and they have gone through this initial exercise of 4 weeks of training. And there is a skill development workshop which is coming up. So it's a hands-on work and an outreach project which the studio ends up with. So beyond this, there are several other very key noted studios that we have, but due to the paucity of the time, I think let's kind of come back to this event. And we wish to hear more on, especially this session, on low cost versus cost effectiveness. I think this is something which we really look forward to hear from you, sir, at your presentation. So over to you, sir, and a warm welcome to School of Architecture.
Yes, so thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to inform, for the benefit of the audience, that you can post your questions in the YouTube comment section, and we will take it up during the question answer session. And a note for Christites that a Google form would be sent in the comment section itself for you to claim attendance, and a feedback form. Thank you. Jyoti ma'am, if you would quickly like to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you.
And hand it over to Sir. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Anita, for this very nice introduction of School of Architecture. Thanks, Ishita, and the Daksh team, I would say. And thanks to Dr. Gopal Shankar for accepting my request and being part of this talk. It is a privilege to have you all, and my co-faculties and the complete students of Christ University is eagerly waiting for your guidance and advice through this journey of futures of architecture and the cost-effective technologies. So over to you, sir. I'm excited to hear about this subject.
Thank you, Architect Jyoti Gupta. Thank you, Architect Anita Suchilan. And thank you, young architect Ishita Iyer, for using such glorious words to sort of introduce me. Thank you for all your kindness. It's my privilege to join you on this platform. Last few months, I've been on this platform day in and day out, talking about sustainability, talking about architecture during pandemic times. This is where I would start my talk on. We are actually going through heavy, stressful times. We are going through pandemic times. The threat is still looming large on the horizon. It is not going away. And as a social activist, I think these times are going to last for probably a long time. Probably these kind of viral outbreaks can come back again, and like disasters, probably these things could become calendar events due to many, many reasons. I don't want to go into the details, but I would actually attribute the contribution of architecture, because we are actually, as architects, we are responsible for the built-up environment. And as it is, we are also partially responsible for these outbreaks. I will come to that later. The first part of the talk is going to be on future of housing, future of architecture per se. I have always believed that architecture is contextual. It has related to times, it has related to the context. Otherwise, your architecture, whatever intervention that you do in the field of architecture is going to be dumped. It has to be contextual. When I say contextual, it has to relate to time, it has to relate to period, It has to relate to the lifestyles of that particular point of time, that particular time period. When I say that, we have to look back. It's always good to look back, because look at history of architecture, how it evolved and things like that. And even in the first year of architecture, I know Christ School is a very, very young school of architecture. In the first year, you learn about history of architecture. You must have gone through the books written by Barrister Fletcher and a few people like that about history of architecture. Why should you learn the history of architecture? It's very critical. As a student of architecture, that you should go through. You should imbibe the spirit of history. Very important that you imbibe the spirit of history before you start understanding what this is all about. It's very important that you learn about history, you imbibe the spirit of history before you embark on this wonderful journey called architecture. I say wonderful journey because history teaches you a lot of things. I made a statement in the beginning. I was telling you that architecture is always contextual. How it related to times, how it evolved in India. And I don't want to go into the details, but I want the students, at least the students of architecture who are out there listening to this discourse, to really imbibe the spirit of history, because when architecture is purely based on experiences, it's purely based on, when I say history, it is based on experiences. You look at the vocabulary of materials, how it has changed in India. The basic vocabulary of building materials. In Kerala, where I'm from, I can see very distinct passage from wooden structures to brick structures to concrete structures. Over the years, the vocabulary of materials have changed, the vocabulary of needs have changed, the basic language has changed, everything has changed over the years. This is why I tell you that architecture is very contextual, because it always gets related to time, it always gets related to people, it always gets related to the paradigm of architecture. How it happens is a major point of study. You have to start from there, because how it evolved. Earlier, you had architecture for the powerful people, the rich people who were ruling us. Architects for Kshatriyas, for instance. Architecture for Kshatriyas was completely different from architecture for the Shudras, the working class. So this is very evident when you look at the design of palaces to the design of vernacular residential houses. Across India, we have followed different styles of architecture. Let me be very regional specific, because I'm going to talk about Indian context. I don't want to go into international context, because that will need a lot more interventions. And I don't want to track my topic into such wider dimensions. I want to remain to Indian context and Indian paradigm. When I say that Indian paradigm, I am very sure that the students of architecture who are going into second year and third year must have already gone through this journey. You have seen how Toranas were developed, how Mughal architecture influenced Indian architecture, how that wedding came between Mughal architecture and vernacular Indian architecture, and what happened to the styles of architecture. We went into an amalgamated, when you really look at it, it was an amalgamation of so many styles of architecture. Gautam Bhatia, the present day icon of architecture, he talks about a very interesting phenomenon that's happening. He talks about Punjabi Baroque. He talks about Tamil Tiffany styles of architecture. Nothing wrong in that. It's a blend of probably two diverse styles of architecture. How meaningful, how beautiful is another question that we will contemplate later. But this is happening across the world. Now, globalization has brought the things together. The styles from, the Spanish villas are beginning to appear in Indian landscapes. It's bound to occur because we are all talking about a universal style of architecture now. The vernacular identity is getting lost. The vernacular identity of architecture is getting muddled, it's getting lost. And now we are talking about a universal style of architecture. There are a few statements that I want you to remember. It was Le Corbusier, who said, "House is a machine to live in." He actually was trying to herald a new era in architecture when he made the statement that houses can be machines to live in. He took the emotional content out, he took the experiential coefficient out, and he looked at the mechanical side, how machines would take over our life, our destiny, things like that. And till then, we had iconic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright and people like that who were talking about the virtues of organic architecture. He was talking about architecture that belonged to the times, architecture that belonged to the profile of the land, architecture that that respond to the contours of the land and things like that. He said, Frank Lloyd made a very epoch-making statement when he said that building should belong to the mountain. It should not be on a mountain, it should be off a mountain and things like that. Because Frank Lloyd Wright made that statement. And suddenly, in a few years' time, the dictum of architecture, the language of architecture, the vocabulary changed. There was a new style of architecture, what they call as modernist architecture, was trying to evolve. It took us by storm. Till then, we were talking about architectural identities in a much more emotional, passionate way. Suddenly, it became a kind of universal style. It got disconnected from vernacular identities. And that is what you are seeing the world over now. Sitting in Bangalore, where I myself had been following Bangalore landscape for the last probably 30, 35 years. How the landscape has changed over the years. Am I audible? Am I audible? One of you?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Am
sir.
I audible?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, okay. So, so that has happened. Over the years, am I audible?
Yes, sir. There is a little lag, but you are audible. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what is happening is the world over, people are moving away from regional identities. That is a big crisis that is in front of you. I will base my observations on future of architecture on my little paradigm of regional identities, regional vocabularies, regional language of architecture, which I think is the right way forward. In architecture, there can be many rights. There can be only one right. And that, I think, is the most relevant, most meaningful way to go ahead. What makes Indian architecture so special? I should say with such pride, with such passion and compassion that India's vernacular architecture is probably one of the most profound styles of architecture, especially when it comes to residential architecture. That is where I'm talking about the importance of regional identity. How when you across India, we have so many identities. The houses in Karnataka are so different from house in Kerala. It's so different from house in Tamil Nadu. I'm just talking about a small part of the country, South India, and still you have very distinct regional identity, which makes it very, very special. And we have two takes on Vastu, how Vastu has kind of dominated our senses. But let me tell you that nowhere in the world, I make a statement, you can come back to me, attack me on that. Nowhere in the world, architecture based on pure mathematics. I'm telling you once again, architecture based on pure mathematics is evident anywhere else in the world. Our vernacular architecture is based on pure mathematics. At a time when trigonometry, calculus, algebra were not really there. There was only one domain of mathematics. And I still wonder how they could, calculate the tan theta, Tan theta can be derived now using your computers, using your mobiles. Probably you can go into tan theta calculations. But those days, When I say tan theta, I'm talking about the sloping members of the roof. If you have a sloping roof, tile roof, you need to calculate the length of the sloping member, that inclined member. How do you get that? Working on the floor. You're not working on the rooftop, you're working on the floor, calculating a length of a wooden piece and then joining it at the top. I mean, it's wonderful. When you really look at domain of mathematics, how it invaded the domain of architecture is something which we should be proud of. It's a heritage that we are imbibing. Not only that, our architecture always responded to climate. Our architecture always responded to people's lifestyles. It's very, very important. That is why I don't, when I look at Western architecture, one of my favorite architects is Antonio Gaudi, the Spanish architect. I thought he was a saintly figure. He's the only saint, I was found in the whole faculty of architecture. I mean, I don't think a man can do such interventions in architecture. His magical interventions continue to mesmerize me. But it's magic of colors, it's magic of forms, it's magic of experiences. But it never ever responded to people's lifestyle. When you really look at it, our architecture always responded to people's lifestyle. In Western architecture, when you look at it, they were symbols of power, they were symbols of greed, they were symbols of not many values. Indian architecture was value-based. And when you're talking about the future course of architecture, this is something that I want each student of architecture. I'm not talking about people of my age because our times are all getting up. For the students of architecture, you should have this particular frame of discussion in your mind. I mean, you have to take a side on this. There are a lot of criticisms about heritage, getting into the modern vocabulary of architecture. I mean, you have to take on a call on this. Architecture, present-day architecture has to be discussed about. You have to take a call on that. I mean, instead of that, you talk about Renaissance architecture, reformist architecture, new modern architecture, new styles, ultra-modern architecture, post-modern architecture, and things like that. But you somewhere miss the point. You somewhere miss the point of identity. My dear friends, we are all building, for instance, houses is a basic expression of architecture. House is a basic expression of architecture, isn't it? I mean, that's the most visible expression of architecture for most of us. Our own houses, our own buildings like temples, churches, these are visible expressions of architecture as visible expressions of built environment as far as a normal Indian is concerned, a normal student of architecture. And these are the first impressions of architecture that you get, looking at your own house and trying to evaluate it. My dear thing, we should take pride in that. We should really take pride in that old regional identity issue. Whether it is relevant is something that you should contemplate. I'm just going to leave you some open-ended questions. I'm not a person to give you answers. I've explored it in my own way. And my observations are, it's an offshoot of my own experiences, So, you can definitely differ with that. I want to put my ideas forth. Please criticize me on my ideas and together at the end of the day. There's no, I don't want a bifurcation between the student and the teacher. I want that particular boundary to go. Please feel free at the end of the discussion to criticize me. You criticize me outright, and together I'll put my thesis. You come out with an antithesis. Together, can we go for synthesis? Is the crux of the discussion. This is what I want you to do. So enjoy this journey. And what is the future? When you Google and find out about future of architecture, they talk about probably artificial intelligence taking over architecture, robots taking over. They talk about virtual realities. They talk about tools. They talk about tools and tools and tools, which is a thing which is disgusting to people like me. Architecture should happen on a drawing board. Architecture should happen architecture should happen on a drawing board. Can you see me? I think, is there a disruption again?
No, sir. No, sir. We can see you and hear you clearly.
Okay. And Ambi, are you Vilkan, Magane? One thing that I would like to emphasize at this point of time is purely this. Regional identity, how does it affect the future of housing or future of architecture per se in this country? Let us, for the time being, I'm sure some of you must be actually waiting for me to talk about tools. I don't want to do that, waste my time on tools, because we have the tools here. We have we have the tools here, and we have the language here. And how to develop the future courses is something that you should explore and find out probably at a later stage. Now, why this is important in the social context is because of a lot of concerns connected to the future of architecture in India. For instance, let me tell you that our architecture should respond to the climate. I'm saying the physical climate and the social climate. When I say that physical climate and social climate, it's very, very important. I'm telling you, my dear young friend, it's very, very important to talk about the physical climate and the social climate. Unless you respond to the physical climate, the vagaries of physical climate, changes in physical climate, and the changes in the social climate, I'm sure the future is going to be very bleak. The future is going to be very bleak. I know that the students out there are going to build in a very difficult domain now. Urbanization is bringing so many changes in the fabric. Urbanization cannot be wished away. There's a promise of urbanization. There's a potential of urbanization. But urbanization brings a lot of pressure on the other dynamics, like poor people, settlements, housing, for instance, other infrastructure which is needed for a sustainable built-up environment. A lot of pressure. But you should understand that it cannot be wished away. Urbanization cannot be wished away. And by 2050, that is when the students of architecture are going to be in the Middle Ages. India is going to be a fully urbanized state. India is going to be a fully urbanized country. Till now, we are talking about 60, 40, 70, 30, the division between the urban areas and rural areas. But you are going to work in a very exciting domain. This is the hope that I want to leave you with. You are going to work in a domain which I call as a transition area. It is not the urban area. You cannot do one building in Bangalore urban area because it's clogged, it's finished, it's saturated, it's finished. You cannot have another building out there. You are going to work in the suburban areas. You are going to work in the suburban areas across around Bangalore cities. There's so many Mofussil areas, what I call as semi-urban, very urban areas where you are going to base your architecture in. That area is going to give you a lot of innovative, lot of creative spaces. So that is the future of architecture, at least for urban landscapes in India. You are going to get a very exciting space, transition area. This is the area between the rural suburbs and the urban suburbs, where you are going to put your architecture, where you are going to base your architecture, where you are going to build. I mean, that is the domain in which you are going to do that. And when I say future of architecture, I always said it has to be related to people's aspirations, and they're waiting for you. You see, the population at large in India, they're waiting for good architectural statements because it is a part of their environment. The people of India, they also deserve very beautiful buildings. They had a huge legacy of having beautiful buildings before the advent of architects. You know that. Old churches that we made, old temples that we made, old palaces that were made. We didn't have qualified architects to do that. And still you look at it, you look at Mysore Palace and say, wow, what an expression of architecture. Whether you like it or not, it's an expression of architecture that still continues to dazzle your senses, isn't it? When you look at Mysore Palace, it still dazzles, it's so motivating. It still inspires you, And looking at the palace architecture, they were not built with the help of architects. Architects, when I look at the future of architecture, it's going to be architects who are going to build. Since you are responsible for the built up environment, it's you who are going to build. And you have to be responsible to the times, you have to be responsible to the fabric of people. When I say that, I have to briefly touch on the social context. That is very, very important. When you're building, the future of, you are going to the Le Corbusier and some of the iconic architectural influences in your life. They might talk about machines. They might talk about faceless buildings. But I, for instance, was, rooted in Indian traditions and Indian identity. I think each of the house should be different. Each of the buildings should be different. It should reflect people's aspirations. It should reflect people's wishes. It should respond to metaphysical qualities. It should not respond to physical qualities. It should also respond to metaphysical qualities. This is what is going to make your building very different. You have to base it on your experiences. You have to look at the people's mindscape. If their mindscape, which is very important. You're going to build for rich people, you're going to build for poor people, you're going to build for widows, you're going to build for people with challenges, you're going to build for mentally challenged people, you're going to build for each one of them have their faces, their dreams, their domain of dreams, and how you could relate to that. Even if it's a public building, even if it's a public building. I know you are getting influenced by, fantastic architecture, iconic architecture, steel and glass, big expressions of steel and glass. And you should look at it critically. Is that the only material that we have? You see, architects always work with tools. The markets are open, but look at the traditional idiom of the traditional vocabulary of building material. Where else in the world, let me tell you, I'm going to make a statement. Where else in the world can you get such a vocabulary of building materials? The building materials that you get in Karnataka, for instance, the stones that you get in Karnataka. Where else in the world can you get such beautiful building stones? Not in Kerala, not in Tamil Nadu, but the stone quarries of Bangalore, around Bangalore, can give us such beautiful this thing. The bricks that you get from Malu, it's a suburban area of Bangalore. Where else can you get such beautiful bricks? You look at the local idioms of architecture, local vernacular styles. Karnataka, I built Karnataka house when I come to Bangalore. I'm telling you. Because I look at regional identity, regional face, and that is what I do. I don't believe in universal kind of architecture. I build buildings and I build townships. I build institutional campuses, all stick into regional identities and regional contexts. Because that I think is very, 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 very critical. Don't look at the expressions of colonial architecture and say, of course, they were made, they had their concerns made, but you have to take a call on that. You have to make a call on that. Whether this is Indian. I'm not being very patriotic about it. Let me be very clear about it. I'm not being very patriotic about it, but let me tell you, every disaster times teaches you, they give you a lot of opportunities for you to learn. It teaches you very, very important lessons. And one of the most important lessons that pandemic times is going to leave with you is to look at regional architecture, regional context, and things like that. And if you don't respond to the needs of the time, your architecture will be dumped. Question me? You can question me on that. But let me make a statement that your architecture will be dumped. I make a very harsh, brutal statement when I say that unless otherwise you respond to regional identity. And I want each of you to look at Charles Correa. I want you to look at the words of Doshi, Balakrishna Doshi, because these two architects, whether you accept it or not, Charles Correa has done multi-story buildings. Kanchenjunga, for instance. How it responded to the landscape and how it responds to the mindscape is very, very critical. You should make a case study of Kanchenjunga, for instance, made by Charles Correa. how Doshi, the Institute of Indology in Ahmedabad, you look at Doshi's work, Balakrishna Doshi's work. What was different about Balakrishna Doshi? He used the elements, even the element of water. It's very important in Indian architecture, element of water, how he got it integrated into modern using concrete, this thing on one side, very different vocabulary. And let me also, I'll just reel out a name. You can look at it later. The vocabulary of material I detest. But when I look at the metaphysical quality of space, I stand in pranams. I should tell you that. This is what I do whenever I go to Japan. Tokyo and Anto. There's not only monstrous concrete buildings, but the metaphysical quality of his architecture is something which is mesmerizing to people like me.
Hello? Sir, can you hear me? Hello, sir. I think he's facing a few network issues. Anita ma'am, would you like to take over here?
I think it was wonderfully building around the premise of his talk. I think that's something very kind of appreciable. Like, where are we heading to? The architectural realm, the construction of the current times, the materials that we are using, the sensibilities with which we would make a choice. I think what he's coming towards is an appropriateness of making a decision. Like, how do we kind of choose a material, even when we have a purchase power to get certain materials and reach out to certain materials? How do we make a kind of a regional identity? That's something very, very interesting to look at and be pondering over, especially for students who are listening to this talk at the other end. It would be nice to have this question in mind, like, what is regional identity, and does regional identity change with times? That's also something very important, even vernacular architecture for that matter. And it's quite amazing from his speech that was coming out that when vernacular architecture is looked at, the variety of sensibility and the way people, I think it is a collective architecture where authorship doesn't belong to, okay, this is the architecture of this time period done by so and so architect. No, it isn't like that. It's a collective authorship. So these are something which is very fabulous about the vernacular architecture and the regional identity that he's trying to talk about. And also, I think many of his works represent that quality as well. I think that is something very important. And I feel as an educational institution, it is very important to sensitize students to these conceptual ideas, and as well as a value that is built within the students to make an appropriate decision. Because many a times, especially during the current times, what Dr. Shankar was kind of trying to premise, at times you've come across that the client comes up with certain choices. It even becomes, for the architect, it becomes a responsibility of the architect to kind of sensitize the client, to kind of make him or her think about what are the other alternatives, what are the other beautiful options that we have got at the regional context. So I think at school, I think we have initiated several studios with a varying different thrust, one of which was the rural studio. But I think sir has come back. I think over to you, sir. You are muted, sir.
Yeah, now I'm okay. I'm sorry, something happened to my computer, and I'm really sorry. I lost around 3-4 minutes. I'm sorry you have to bear up with me for this. Now, I will have to move away because I was talking about regional identity of architecture, and I was talking about, the future of architecture in India for young architects is to look at architecture in the transitional areas, is to look at regional identities, and is to look at the spirit of Indian architecture, which is based on experiences. looking at metaphysical fabric and things like that. I will not dwell on that little. Probably I'll talk about this later. And from here, I will move on to my favorite subject of probably housing technologies. And I'll just, due to paucity of time, I'm just going to make some outrageous statement which will shake you from a slumber and probably make you think about what I'm going to talk about. I was talking about regional vocabulary of building materials, which are, I mean, building material is something with which an architect works. And he should be very happy about the tools. You know, these are the tools by which you translate a building. I'm telling you, it is not the drawing on the board. I know it's an architect's job, but beyond that, when it gets, this is why I feel the entire clan of architects are so privileged, because what happens is your thoughts are getting converted to a 3D model, isn't it? It gets converted, your metaphysical thoughts get converted to a physical model in 3 dimensions. You think in 2 dimensions, but the building comes in 3 dimensions. Who else in the world can have such a privilege of converting your thoughts into a 3-dimensional physical form? So this is a privilege that you get. But when you build it in 3 dimensions, you build it with material. You build it with some languages. And this is what I'm going to talk about, the vocabulary with which you should build. When I say that, I have some, call me eccentric, but I have some very strong prejudices on this. Because of 2 reasons. 2 reasons. I've been steeped in disaster-resistant architecture for the last 30 years. And I don't think anybody in the world has got such an experience like what I have got across the world on disaster-resistant architecture. Like I said, what happens during disaster, I mean, everywhere in Bangalore, why nights are become colder and days are becoming hotter is something that you should contemplate on. Climate change has become a calendar event. Floods, cyclones are going to be a calendar event. Climate change is already there. The impact of climate change is going to ruin the future of architecture. If I can make a brutal statement like that, it's going to ruin, because we are responsible for the climate change. I'm telling you, I make a statement for the climate change that's happening. We are responsible because we are making built up environment and we are contributing to the climate change. Technologies, we as a clan, as a breed, as a class, as a family, we are responsible for the climate change. When I make a statement that we are partially responsible for climate change, we should try to use materials in a very, very diligent way, very, very intelligent way. I mean, you have to be optimizing a lot of things when you talk about this material. This is why over the years, I've been talking against the excessive use of steel and cement, because steel and cement are not the materials for the future. That could ruin the future of, if you're still going for steel facades and glass facades and concrete monstrosities, as I call it. Why? Because both these materials still use outdated manufacturing processes to get the materials out. Outdated manufacturing processes that need a lot of energy. I mean, we cannot wish away. Now we have a huge energy crisis, and if Indian materials cannot respond to that, it's going to be a doomsday for us. I mean, we have to optimize. I know there are no substitutes for cement, there are no substitutes for steel, but our search for materials should actually start from there. Our technologies means usage of material. Technologies means optimal usage of material. Technology should mean responsible use of material. And that is where probably myself in the domain of cost-effective housing. I just talk about 3 materials.
We're really sorry for the technical inconvenience. I think it's almost time. Yes,
I'm
sir.
audible now.
Yes, sir.
I'm audible now, no?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I mean, it is getting. And one of the things that I want to talk about is Earth. I'll talk briefly about bamboo because Anita was talking about a bamboo initiative is being initiated in Christ School of Architecture. I will also briefly talk about light. I will I will talk about these three materials and wind up my session on that. Why Earth? Why Earth? Because it's available everywhere. Only thing is that you have to choose your Earth. With Earth, there are 4 or 5 methods of doing earth buildings. You must be familiar with other forms of the pop construction. You talk about rammed earth construction, which is everywhere. I talk about stabilized earth floor construction, which is that is a handy thing now, which is actually taking over Kerala by storm. I'm the person who started this movement, but in Kerala, 10,000s of buildings are being built up using the stabilized smart block. Looking at the limitations, looking at the, but we are actually mainstreaming it. We are mainstreaming this material. We are mainstreaming this material and looking at the future of the state. Mud is a very viable building material. The only problem is you have to choose it well. I choose mud because it's energy efficient, it's cost efficient, it is insulating, it is sustainable. And you don't have to look on the Western front to get the expertise from. We are the best masons in the world. I do believe that we have best resources and we know how to build in mud. We have beautiful, we can create such textures, we can create such colors. It's fascinating, it's intoxicating, if you can make that word. It's intoxicating and to have architecture. You have to mainstream it. It's prone to dampness. It is vulnerable in damp conditions. It can be eaten away by termites. How do you do that is a question that we should answer. We have lots of traditional answers for that. We have modern day answers also for that. We have non-erodible mud plaster, promoted by CBRI, Central Building Research Institute. There are many interventions that have come. But traditional knowledge is enough to look at the challenges of mud architecture. I am telling you with such conviction because I built the largest earth building in the world. Earth building complex that measures around 600,000 square feet. I built it in the floodplains of Brahmaputra in Bangladesh. 600,000 square feet of built-up area using mud as the primary building material. When you get time, you can Google and find out about my own residence. I mean, which can be of some interest to you. Google and you'll find out the architecture that I'm trying to promote using mud. How beautifully I'm using mud. Mud as a roofing material. Mud normally you use it for walling, but I'm extending it to logical extremes, using it as a, Hassan Fatih had been a great influence on me. Hassan Fatih's Nubian walls. And I've learned a lot from Hassan Fatih walls. Mud roofs, without reinforcement, without cement intervention, I'm having mud roofs. And I'm just trying to initiate a discussion. If my roofs can stand in a place where there's a lot of rainfall, it should initiate a discussion. That is what is more important. When I say earth buildings, I want to initiate a discussion. And earth is as strong as any other building material, provided it is used, incorporating the engineering knowledge and things like that. I don't want to go at length. Again, it's equivalent to steel now. When you look at why do you use steel for tensile strength? Why do you use steel in concrete? It's for tensile strength. If you can get the same tensile strength of bamboo, why not use it? Why not flaunt it? Why not use bamboo? Because it generates local employment. It's less costly. It answers our basic questions about climate change. It answers about these things about ozone depletion. Bamboo is a material which actually addresses the only material that man has found addressing the carbon emission issues. Carbon emission issue. Bamboo, when it grows, it takes a lot of carbon dioxide for its growth. Only material. We have such beautiful materials around us. And we have the engineering knowledge. We have to upgrade it. We have to update it. And then the future is going to be ours. Kerala, we have a huge deposit of lime. I have always, I've been telling people that lime is as good as cement. It's packaged different. When you look at the newspapers, you talk about muscle persons, pump and bridges and things like that. You use a particular brand of cement. But I'm telling you with such conviction, because I work with my own hands, my dear friends. I'm a different breed of architect who still works with our own hands, This hands-on experience is amazing. That is why when I talk about earth, when I talk about lime, when I talk about bamboo, I work with my own hands. And that makes a magical difference in architecture, I have I have learned the properties of bamboo, properties of mud using my own thing. I make textures on the wall using my own hands, and the feel is very, very great. And that's why I'm very convinced about the strength, durability, and rest of it. Lime, I've been talking about lime. Lime is cement. When you look at the basic chemical composition of lime, chemical composition of cement is the same, but with a structural limitation. It cannot be used for concreting because your steel that you put for tensile strength, it can get eroded. That's why you don't use liming. There are several areas. Let me tell you, flooring, for instance, subflooring. You need a subflooring. You put PCC and things like that. For that, lime concrete is any day better than ordinary cement. So, when you look at low-cost technologies, you should look at 5-6 parameters. Very, very critical. Don't use the name low-cost. Anita was actually mentioning about that. Use the word cost-effective, because when you say low-cost material, people get a feeling that, oh, this is low quality. This cannot be used for good quality buildings. This is always for the poor, not for the rich. Forget about it. I'm telling you, forget about it. We talk about resource efficiency. We talk about people-friendly architecture. Let me go in new word. People-friendly materials and people-friendly technology. I think that's a better word, because that will gain more acceptance among the masses who are looking for such interventions. Unfortunately, people who need houses in India, they don't belong to rich and powerful. They are out there in numbers. The middle class people and the lower middle class people who need such beautiful expressions of architecture. Reach out to them. I'm telling you, reach out to them. They will hold your hands, because once they know about the versatility of the material, the durability of the material, the plasticity of the material, the architectural potential of the material. When you use this material, don't use it like, don't do bamboo huts. Use bamboo for multi-storied buildings. That's the confidence with which you should form the material. When I say mud buildings, now recently I took a frame building, all right, frame building, but 14-storied frame building, I used mud as a pattern material throughout, 14 stories. Mud, somewhere as a load-bearing material, somewhere as a curtain material, all the 14 stories. My buildings in Bangladesh, they're 4-story building, 5-story building without frame, completely in mud. You have to take that potential. This is just to initiate a discussion. Initiate it. If mud can stand, anything else can stand. The important thing for the housing technologies is that I was talking about 5 parameters. With that particular time is getting up. I will wind up. First of all, in India, when you're looking at technologies, I'm just going to delete that word, low cost. I'm just going to talk about efficient housing. You should look at insulation. Our materials should insulate. Climates are changing, interiors getting hotter. You cannot live in a concrete house now because it's so hot outside. You need insulating houses, which will protect you from. You spend half of your lifetime in interiors. You need insulating material. You need cost-effective material. You need energy-efficient material. You need eco-sensitive material. There's no other way, my dear friends. I mean, our days will be doomed if you don't use eco-sensitive material. You have to use energy-efficient material. I mean, there is no other thing that can actually put this forward. And our time is limited. I made a statement, outrageous statement in the beginning, that we are responsible for the climate change. As architects, we should put our heads down in shame. I have so many statistics to tell you elaborate on my statement. I don't have time now. But if I reel out one statement, that should be good enough. I'm just reeling out one statement, one little statement that should wind it up. We are using 5 billion liters a day. My dear friends, 5 billion liters a day is 5 followed by so many zeros. It goes beyond your comprehension. Can you imagine, Ishita out there, can you imagine what this figure means? 5 billion liters a day is being used in India to flush out the dirt from the toilets. Water everywhere, but not interrupting the Indian situation. And we are talking about 5 billion liters of potable water being used in our toilet to flush out the dirt. Water everywhere. In Karnataka, I've seen the dry beds of Kaveri. Kaveri is one river that gives you water. Kaveri is dead. Kaveri is drying up. And I've seen many parts of Kaveri which are, I walk around Kushal Nagar. I walk around lots of areas of, especially southern Karnataka areas. I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. The water levels of Bangalore city, 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet is the water level of Bangalore city. Borewells are becoming redundant. It's terrible. It's terrible. And we are responsible. Can we look at water efficient? When I say resource efficient, water efficient technologies. Water efficient technologies to build our houses. There are lots of technologies. I don't want to waste my time on that. This is a direction. This is an indicator. I think this is the right way out. Architecture based on truthfulness and honesty. Architecture based on regional identity. That should be your criterion for looking at technologies, looking at future course of architecture. With these words, it's already 1:30 plus. I will limit my thing to that. I'm sorry, there were interruptions in between. I'm not a computer savvy person, and in between, I think my computer got rebooted.
Definitely.
Rebooted.
Definitely, sir. No problems. No problems.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given. I'll wait for a few questions and then.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much for your enlightening talk. And I'm sure that the students and the audience would have earned an extensive amount of knowledge from your speech. So let's, I can see that there are already some questions. So, sir, the first question is, do you think there might be scope in the future for tearing down of older structures in urban areas and construction of new buildings for the purpose of development and safety?
That's a very, very, very meaningful question. And thank you very much for that. One of my major interventions as an architect, for which I take pride in, is not building thousands and tens of thousands of buildings, but I take pride in an area where young students of architecture should concentrate on. I'm talking about domain of retrofitting. I'm talking about revitalization. I'm talking about renovation of old buildings. It's very, very critical. In the name of strength, in the name of development, so many nice buildings are being pulled out. Wrong. That's not the way. When you're talking about resource efficiency on one thing, you should always consider that with little surgeries, little cosmetic surgeries, you are talking about a new domain, you need better spaces, you actually pull down. I'm just talking about residences. You pull down a building for two reasons. One is it doesn't look good. It doesn't meet your present day requirements. Your rooms are very small. It's not ventilated well. You don't have attached toilets to the buildings and things like that. These can be added with very little meaningful intervention. So retrofitting is a major thing that you should do before pulling up a building. Now, you are talking about for developing a particular area, your building is occupying so many square feet. If you pull that down, probably using the current vocabulary of building norms, you are talking about floor area ratio, which is probably 4+, you get more commercial areas. Well, when you do that, you have to look at a new planning norm. You have to respect the building rules. You have to look at the commercial value of the land. But low-rise and high-density kind of development is a thing that you should really look at. This is my very brief response to the first question.
Okay. I think, sir, there's one more question. How can we change people's attitude towards sustainable materials like mud, which is considered a third world material?
This is something that mud is our material, our material. In India, I mean, where else can you get such a beautiful material which we can build, you know? I can build it in Maharashtra. I can build it in Andhra Pradesh because they're talking about cotton, black cotton soil. I know that it is being touted as a poor man's building material. Third world, unfortunately, implies poverty, you know, lack of opportunity. When you do this, I always tell the students of architecture, ये सब दिल से करना पड़ेगा. दिल से करना पड़ेगा. You should do it with your heart, passion, and compassion. These things are very important when you want to project a material. You should be also knowing of the engineering properties of material. This is why I'm building. I've already built 10,000s of mud buildings across the country. And this is why I continue to concentrate on that because I'm sure each building I make is actually creating. And so many people will come to the house and tell me that this might fall on you in few years' time. This is this. That's how the technology moves on. Mud has got its inherent weakness, and it's for you people, we are fading out, and you people who should take the technologies forward. First of all, you should believe in the technology. Touch the material. It's like touching a person. It's like holding your hands. Once you touch the material, then the engineering properties will appear on your fingertips. It can be mesmerizing, fantastic journey, my dear friend. It can be mesmerizing journey. That's the journey that I want you to undertake. Thank you.
Sir. I think we can take one final question because of the time constraint, but we're very thankful to all the students who have actively participated and asked questions. So the question is, in Kerala...
One second, Anita has put in a question on the chat box. Yes. She is actually talking about the resources, the labor resources. Obviously, we have the talents. Earlier there was a legacy of traditional talents. There were you're a carpenter, your son becomes a carpenter. There's a traditional legacy of that. That legacy is broken. That lineage is broken. Now the only thing is that we need to tell them. Workers need to be told that it is ultimately for you. It's not for it's people like you. If you want efficient houses, which are cool, which are positive, which can look very beautiful, which can be functionally very efficient, it's for you that we are building. Once they get that ideological focus on the material, I'm talking about very simple technologies. I don't use that is why I hate prefab technology, which needs heavy engineering inputs. The technology that I'm trying to talk about, they don't need that kind of an engineering skill. It should be value-based. It should be truthful and honest. And then we can do this. Yes, there is a dearth of trained people in this. We are trying to address it. We are in our own Habitat has got an informal school of housing. We train thousands of people in traditional technologies, cost-effective technologies, right? Yeah, I think I have answered a part of your response, Anita. Yeah.
So, sir, finally, the last question from the student. In Kerala, where the flood is an yearly trend, do you think that houses with mud are practical?
This is, yes. Yes, I mean, Ishita, you should also understand that once, probably 12 years back, I was the chairperson of a national committee constituted by Government of India to frame the specifications for disaster-resistant buildings. I was chairman looking at specifications. I'm telling you such this thing that my own house, I don't know, I'm sure you will be having it in the YouTube or some albums. My own house, mud building, went down the water in 2018. What came to my bedrooms? It went over my beds. It went over my bed. My mattresses got kind of drowned in mud and mud. Still, you can see the present day building. It's standing in that. Nothing like that. I mean, flood waters have gone through at least, I'm telling you, I make a statement, 10,000s of my creations. In Kerala, during 2018, at least 10,000 houses, my mud buildings were affected. I mean, in a sense, the flood waters went into the building, but nothing happened. a bit of plaster came off. Probably the wooden members that went out, we were using, probably where we were using plywood, it got puffed up. Damages were there, the smell was there. There's some kind of an abrasion in the areas which went underwater. We had to repaint it. That's all. Nothing happened to the building. That must have happened to plastered building. That must have happened to concrete buildings too. They must have gone in for repainting and things like that. That has happened to my buildings also. You have to believe in this. You really want this kind of architecture, believe in this. And I know there are only few participants, but the participants out there should take some cue from the directions that I've shown you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for my, in between I went over. Thanks for your tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering the questions. And I think we have reached to the end of our session. And herein, I shall propose a vote of thanks. I would like to express my profound gratitude to everyone who has contributed to making this event a successful one. And on behalf of the University Student Council and management of Christ Deemed to be University, I take the opportunity to thank you, our keynote speaker, Dr. Architect G. Shankar, for taking out time from his busy schedule and gracing us with his presence and for conducting such an enlightening session for us. I would like to thank our Controller of Examinations and the Director of Student Council, Professor Johnny Joseph, who has always inspired and encouraged us. Heartfelt thanks to Dr. Suja Mool John ma'am and Dr. Roy Matthews sir for their continuous guidance and motivation. Special mention to Dr. Anita Sushilan, Head of Department, Christ School of Architecture, and Professor Jyoti Gupta for their invaluable encouragement. I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts of my fellow University Student Council members who are a part of events, technical and logistics committee for their consistent support for a smooth conduct. Last but not the least, I thank all the Christites present and all the external participants for joining us and being such a wonderful and participative audience. Thank you.